Hi, I'm Debbie Forster. I'm the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. I'd like to welcome you for our first Flexi Festival. We're on day 2, our working lunch. Hope you have something to eat or drink during the session. Thank you for taking time during your busy day. If this is your first time to join us, welcome. Thank you for coming. If this isn't your first time, you know what's going to happen, so you can go and tweet something about us. If you're new, what you can be able to do is to think about how to interact with on the screen. If we were in a room, I'd be telling you where the loos are, how to get out in an emergency. But today, what I want to tell you, if you look down just below this screen, you'll see 2 tabs. One says Q&A. That's your chance to talk to us. We're going to have a great panel in a few minutes, and they're going to be talking about practical strategies for you. And this may mean that you've got some questions you'd love to ask them. Please put them in that Q&A so that we can feed it to the panel later. As we're talking, I'm going to talk about tonight's sessions. I'm going to talk about tomorrow's sessions. And if you're thinking, goodness, I haven't had a chance to sign up for that. Well, you still can. So cursor a little bit further down. You can see the agenda for the whole of the festival and sign up for the remaining sessions. We will be talking in just a second about our open playbook of best practice. We'll be referring to our annual report, our directory. So that is the toolkit for the Tech Talent Charter. If you'd like to have a peek at that, if you've not had a chance, scroll down a little further. You'll see where you can go in to look at the report, what that showed us this year, compare your data to see how you measure up against other companies in this sector. Or you can download resources, not just on the resources that we're covering today, but to think about culture, data, retraining. It's in the open playbook and it's free for you to use. Then, if you are joining us and you are not yet a Tech Talent Charter signatory, you should be. It's free. It's a great way of joining in to help work together to find solutions to drive inclusion and diversity in tech. So just keep cursing down. You'll see the information. And then at the very bottom of the page, last but not least, it is free to join the Tech Talent Charter, and all of our materials and events are free. We can do this because we have some amazing corporate sponsors. So you can see that people like Unilever are sponsoring the whole of the festival. You'll see that HP is sponsoring the activities that we're having this morning and for today's lunch. So the theme for this week is tough conversations and meaningful action together. And yesterday we spent time really digging into the data and really looking back over the last year to understand what's the good news, what's the bad news, where have we made progress, what do we need to do next. And it is important to understand both parts of that phrase, tough conversations. It isn't easy. It isn't comfortable. It is going into things that we've not done before. But it is also through conversations. It's not telling people, it's not dropping policies from on high, but really bringing people with us and understanding what people need. But it is also about meaningful action. It's not just about intention, it's what we do next. Now, we have always pledged for the Tech Talent Charter that this was about much more than gender. We began with the lens of gender, but with the pledge that this would be about the whole space of inclusion. And by the end of 2019, we were already hearing from our members that they were ready for that. And so throughout 2020, we heard where there was most interest and need was around ethnicity, and it was around social mobility. And so today is that chance to dig into those 2 lenses. And so when we think about that, you're joining today because you want to find more about ethnicity and in particular Black inclusion. But tonight, for our evening cuppa, you can join us for social mobility. And I'll tell you more at the end of the session what you can do. So let's look at what we're talking about today. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we offer are our open playbooks of best practice. That's not because we are all seeing, all knowing. This is because we have access to great people and great insight across the sector. So we curate and create known materials for our open playbooks through something called hackathons. If you're interested in finding out about those, we'll send you some information later if you'd like to join a later hackathon. But we'll be really fortunate last year to be able to gather some amazing professionals in the space to create some really useful, practical, actionable materials around Black inclusion. And that's really what we want to dig in today. So I'll get out of the way. I want to hand over to Rebecca Donnelly, who is going to talk to our panel today. Rebecca is one of our TTC directors. So Rebecca, I think you're joining me on stage.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And yes, thank you to everybody who's joining us for this working lunch session today, and particularly to our fantastic expert panel. So as Debbie said, my name is Rebecca Donnelly. I'm a director at the Tech Talent Charter, and in my day job, a senior partner at Taito PR. But before we kick off, just wanted a reminder to everybody who's watching that we're really keen to keep this conversation going on social media today. So please do share your thoughts and feedback on what you hear using the hashtag TTC2021 and tagging us at Tech Charter UK. And also please do post your questions down below, and we will try and get to as many of them as we can during the session. So the aim of this working lunch is really to talk about practical, actionable advice for people watching today who want to focus on ethnic diversity and Black inclusion in particular in their organisations and aren't quite sure where to start. We're particularly going to be talking about smaller organisations, startups and SMEs who are perhaps addressing some of these issues for the first time and maybe don't have the resources of some of the larger companies we've heard from today. So I'm going to kick off by asking our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly, and then we're going to get right into that conversation. So Ashleigh, can I come to you first, please, for an introduction?
Brilliant. Well, thank you for having me and inviting me. But Ainsley, so I'm co-founder of an organisation called ColorinTech. We set it up about just shy of 5 years ago now, ultimately to try and get more ethnic minorities and people from the Black community into the technology ecosystem. I myself started my career working for Google in the technology space and moved to startups, but throughout that there was a constant theme of not seeing many people frankly look like me. So I wanted to do something about that, and that's what we do. So we're really fortunate to be backed by some amazing brands and names like the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks of this world, and really keen to hear and share some of our experience along that journey with yourself and the panel today.
Fantastic, thank you. Gori, can I come to you next, please?
Sure, thank you, Rebecca. So my name's Gori, so I'm the founder CEO of Upscale Digital, and we build learning and educational programs for large and small organizations to help them essentially build a more inclusive workspace and ensure they can help from an equitable piece their employees, whether they're Black employees or ethnic minority employees, progress through the organization. So we really focus on that education piece. And it's absolute pleasure to be on this session today, because hopefully we can share some of the insights that we've got from some of the programs that we've run, and help you think more practically about how you can help your employees progress, but also build that inclusive environment both for your leadership and hopefully help them communicate that across the organization too.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Marika, I'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Marika. I'm a Silicon Canal tech leader helping to shape Birmingham's tech ecosystem. And I'm very delighted to be here today because I took part as a team leader in the Tech Talent Charter Hackathon. And we led, I think Gori was also part of the team as well. And it was for the education and allyship toolkit, which I think flashed up on the screen a little bit earlier when Debbie was talking. So I'll be looking forward to talking a bit more about that today.
Brilliant. And Yinka, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. My name is Yinka Ewuola. I am the founder of Kala Success Systems, which focuses on supporting women in business to build thriving and profitable businesses while living full, fab and nourishing lives. I'm also a co-founding member of UK Black Tech, and like Marika was also one of the TTC Hackathon team leaders, and focused on supporting and creating the playbook, which focused on recruitment in the Black space. So very happy to be here.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but definitely not least, to Tracey, please.
Thank you, Rebecca. Welcome everyone. My name is Tracey Perera. I am a chair of the Equality and Diversity Inclusion Board Committee at the Chartered Accountants Institute of ICAS. which is an organisation that has 160 people, but 23,000 members of accountants across the world. And we're particularly focusing on ED&I to encourage inclusive leadership and inclusion in all of the accountancy profession around this topic. I'm also a non-exec director for the Tech London Advocates, where we look at the future of work and inclusive leadership as well as part of that. And like Yinka has mentioned, I also was a Tech Talent Charter Hackathon team leader, where we looked at developing, promoting and retaining Black employees. So I'm really pleased to be here today.
Thank you so much, Tracey, and to all of you. I'm really excited to hear all of your advice and start getting into some really practical tips for everybody listening. So let's kick off, and Ashleigh, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay. So let's say I'm a small business leader or working for a medium-sized organisation, and I'm new to inclusion and equality. I'm not quite sure where to start. What are the first things I should be thinking about before I try and roll out initiatives in my own organisation?
Well, everything comes from leadership, actually, at the top of the agenda, at the top of the table. I was working with a number of small businesses and startups on this actually earlier this week, and it really stems from actually how are you selling the organization's values and culture from the very beginning, and that comes in terms of leading from the front, whether that be ways of working, whether that be what sort of policies are written out and established, whether that be actually how do we think about our recruitment, and not necessarily just in terms of I need to hire the next person as quickly as I can because that's what's fundamental to our growth, but I need to hire the right person as quickly as I can, and that's what's necessary for our growth and sustainability in the long term. And actually thinking about setting those sorts of things really in place from day one are super important, because ultimately we've seen in society what happens when that doesn't happen particularly well. Over here in Europe, there are a number of amazingly successful and profitable and large, and sometimes maybe not profitable businesses. But we look around and actually there is still a wave of work that needs to be done in terms of diversity and inclusion. And as we are starting to see, it's not an afterthought. It shouldn't be something that happens, subsequently or after the matter. It needs to be baked in from the beginning. I think there's an inflection point once organizations get to around 50 people in size, where actually it becomes really hard to start to change the culture and the dynamic of where that's going. So really from leaders from the absolute beginning, it's thinking about where are they being seen? Who are they socializing with? As much as meeting customers, partners, clients, investors is important, how are they talent branding their organization to make sure people from all sorts of communities believe that there are opportunities for them within their organizations, and also thinking about how do you stretch beyond the easy networks and actually make it very intentional by design for your company to make sure that you're putting in efforts to build the things that ultimately will fund and enable sustainable economic growth to happen through the benefits of having a diverse working team.
Thank you. And Marika, I wondered if you had anything to build on that in terms of creating the right kind of culture and environment in an organisation for diversity and inclusion initiatives to thrive. Do you have anything to build on what Ashleigh just said?
I really do echo what Ashleigh just said, but as well, and I'm going to refer back to the toolkit. It's able to be used for organisations that are much more established, but also for smaller organisations that may have not yet implemented their diversity and inclusion policies or are working towards that. And so what we did as a team was like some of the very incremental, actionable takeaways that could be put into that are in the toolkit, are resources that are broken down for organisations to pick up at any level. And one of the things that I think is really important, and one of the takeaways that can be implemented quite effectively, is the sense of language and understanding those terms that are used when we discuss about race, and we talk about when we talk about Black employees in the workplace. And sometimes this can be a very sensitive issue to talk about. So there is a glossary there, a resource there that people can learn and pick up the languages and feel more confident in the terms and languages that is spoken. And one of the reasons why we started with this sort of glossary in part of the resource was because we found that we acknowledge that there is an increase in confidence and understanding when people understand the language that is spoken, and use those terms sensitively and consciously as well. And I think it also enables for open and honest dialogue. And I think that should start right from leadership as a top and bottom commonality that people should have within an organization to start there. But the impact of the toolkit runs across of the education allyship toolkit runs across a lot of different streams. So I think it's very important for all leadership teams to be picking up on some of the things that we spoke about. But I can perhaps go through more about what that is a bit later on, perhaps. But yeah. I do agree with what he's talking about.
No, fantastic. And I think that's a really helpful, really tangible, practical piece of advice to just get the language right and provide the resources for people to know how to start having these conversations.
Yeah, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, it's a really big topic, and I know some of our other panelists are really keen to kind of chime in. So Yinka, can I come to you next?
Yes, Rebecca. And I think Ashleigh and Marika both made really powerful points about leadership and about communication. But I would take it back perhaps one or two steps even from there. To go back to your original question, Rebecca, because you said, imagine you are, the leader of an organization and you want to get involved and you're not really sure where to start. And I think that it is always powerful and important to, first of all, establish why you are trying to do what you're doing. I think purpose, Ashleigh made a really powerful point about values, but I think values and purpose really do sit and fit together. Understanding why you're doing what you're doing is going to have such a powerful determinant in terms of what you're prepared to go through to get to the results that you want, what you're interested in getting involved in. And the fact is that the issues that are that we're discussing and really focusing on are they are issues and discussions. It's interesting that how often these conversations come up, but the fact is that even the Black people who may want to come and work as part of your organization, or the one or two perhaps that are in your organization, they don't want to talk about race either. Race is not something that we wake up in the morning and say, oh, we'd love to talk about, this is where we want to go with the conversation. Not at all. We are, we went to university, we're building businesses, we're living our lives. So the fact that it is something that comes up so often and so frequently and, is constantly brought to the fore is something, leaders of all types of organizations need to remember that the idea of these uncomfortable conversations or discomfort that comes from having to tackle these issues is felt across the board. But comfort isn't really the goal. And so the idea of understanding purpose is really important, because by understanding that, it is going to take discomfort, and it's discomfort across the board, what that gives us is a real opportunity to then make a decision about, okay, so if we're doing this because we believe it's the right thing to do, or because we have, this business case, we want to accurately reflect our growing and diverse customer base, we want to produce better products, better services, understanding the purpose of going into this is what will enable us to drive powerful change and ensure it's sustainable, ensure we have that appropriate communication, ensure we have that vision in the leadership. So I think knowing purpose and being really clear and honest about that, I think is really important.
Yeah. That's an incredibly important point that you've just made there. And I think also allows organizations, even relatively small organizations, to measure the progress they're making, right? If they know why they're doing it, it gives them the opportunity to actually assess whether or not it's working. But Gori, I know you had a point you wanted to build on here as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to work a bit backwards from the point that you just made there about sort of measurement and reporting on it. I think communication is a really key thing, regardless of the size of the organization. Communicating how you're progressing in terms of the change you're trying to make across your organization is really important. So obviously, when things happened last year, we had organizations make statements about BLM and anti-racism in their organization, and at the time, for some organizations, they were worried that people thought there was a bit, disingenuous thinking about, how the makeup of the organization was, and looking at the leadership and feeling like there wasn't much diversity there. But communicating that you can change is one thing. Actually following up and reporting on how you are doing this, creating the safe spaces internally for people to be able to discuss amongst themselves, what they could do and how they could become more equipped to handle, those type of conversations internally is really, really important. So from a leadership level, that communication part is really, really key. I think, we've seen in the news recently about even larger organizations like KPMG, for example, that and other organizations we've come across where leadership have sort of shared messages that have had seismic effects across the organization. And even if you're in a smaller organization, what you say as a leader to your team members, to the organization, it matters, right? So being confident in yourself, having the courage to be able to state that you're on a learning journey is really, really important. If you're in a small organization, perhaps it's just, you might have a COO or even just an operations manager or an HR manager that's really looking at the diversity inclusion within your organization. Give them the support that they need, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to change that culture or help drive this conversation around change, then report on it. Regularly communicate this to the organization. It's key.
Thank you. And Tracey, I wanted to come to you next, because I think we talked a lot about how you might kind of kick off these conversations, how you might start them in your organization, but how do you engage with and interact with people already within your organization and make sure they are on board, perhaps either people from ethnic minority backgrorounds who feel comfortable kind of being part of these conversations and feel like they are included but not expected to run them themselves?
Yeah, so this links to develop, promote and retain Black employees and ethnic diverse individuals. What's really important is to mention two things here, and within that 3 points for each. So one is the structure improvement, and secondly it's the behaviour and culture improvement. Yeah. So with structure, there's 3 areas here. One is around integration, making sure that you look at integrating ED&I and anything around that in your business strategy and your governance. So that's about also your working practices, your policies, procedures, and goals and objectives for everyone. And secondly, it's really looking at equality. Have you got equal pay? Have you got open and honest and transparent promotion processes? It's really important that is well communicated throughout the organisation as well, and that you measure that. You look at the data and you audit it to check how well you're doing. And thirdly, it's looking at education. It's so important to be able to show that you value your employees, no matter, of all their backgrounds. And it's around education on their skills and behaviour and capabilities, but it's also around education awareness of what everyone is experiencing and allowing them to be able to, bring their whole self to work. And that is about creating the right discussion forums and having the allies in the room. Then secondly, if we look at behavioural and culture improvement, the 3 areas there are around belonging, inclusive leadership, and then potential. So belonging, this is really around making sure you create that space of that safe space. So psychological safety, the term that everyone is bashing about around here. But what does that really mean? It's about everyone taking responsibility to show that everyone belongs in that workplace. And that's about everyone being able to have their voice heard and being free to speak and it not to be shut down. When that happens, innovation and creativity really does come to the fore. Secondly, it's around inclusion. And what I mean by that is really inclusive leadership. This is about the board and the C-suite and management leading from the top and leading by example. It's always about how you are setting the state of affairs for that organisation and how does that trickle down. It's about using inclusive language along with that. And thirdly, and really importantly for retaining good talent in the organisation, is around allowing everyone to grow to their full potential. Imagine in a workplace where everyone can really work to their strengths and create really high performing teams. And with that, it's around also making sure you have the pipeline of homegrown talent that really will grow the trust in the organisation, but also improve productivity and performance. So it's really to the benefit of everyone that we work on all these areas.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a lot of key things coming out here. I think we've heard already about the importance of leadership, so kind of getting the tone right from the top, baking it into your business strategy from the start, and then how you kind of build it out into culture. I wanted to talk a little bit more about recruitment and a little bit more about kind of data and sort of measurement of how you track how you're doing. And I wanted to ask perhaps from a smaller business point of view, because we've heard from some larger companies this morning about the importance of data, but how relevant is that for a company of, say, under 50 employees? You know, at what point does data start to become important, and how can those smaller organizations perhaps track their progress? Yinka, I don't know if you had a point of view on that.
Yes, and actually our part of the playbook focused on recruitment, and we really spoke about, I mean, data is incredibly important, but it is the interpretation of data is just as important, because you can make data say and mean anything that you like. I think it is really important that organizations, particularly small ones, if they are passionate and they are committed to really creating a sense of belonging, and really focusing on creating a safe culture. The fact is that, you know, it's as Ashleigh said at the beginning, it's very easy to say, oh, you know, we want a more diverse workforce, so let's go out and, you know, look where we think they are. But actually, to ask people to come into your organization, you're asking them to trust you with their careers. And, you know, while they may be a data point to you, that you know, data point is their entire life to them. And so it is really important that organizations, when they're thinking and using data, that they are able to interpret it accurately and effectively, but they're also able to remember that each individual person is a human, is a story, you know, and has their own individual aspirations and needs. And I think that it is incredibly important. And again, with respect to data, that it starts with honesty. Gori's point to the need to communicate journeys is incredibly important. We saw a lot of bold statements made last year, a lot of black squares, a lot of BLM statements. And the fact is that if everybody was getting everything right to start with, we wouldn't have had the moment that we did. And so it really isn't about getting it right. It's about everybody is concerned about, oh, we don't want to say the wrong thing. If saying the wrong thing is the biggest challenge you face, then you're in an incredibly privileged position. The fact is that it isn't perfection that is required, it's progress. And progress is definitely not measured by, you know, your black squares, or, you know, if you have Black members of your existing organization, then, you know, a great place to start is to go and seek out some honesty, create a space where they can tell you what it is really like, without fear of retribution or challenge or, you know, pushback, or, you know, when it comes time to, you know, be promoted, concern about their jobs. If, you know, you're not going to successfully be able to recruit new Black people into your organization if you cannot be proven to take care of the Black people you have in your organization already.
I think that's a really interesting point about how you balance what you say externally with what you're doing internally. Ashleigh, I'd love your point of view on kind of what an organization should be kind of saying publicly about what they're doing within their business.
Yeah, just to kind of roll back just before I come to that, I think also, like, you know, if you don't measure it, then does it matter? You know, when I was working in what I call like startup land, like a lot of it is very data driven and very focused. And ultimately, you know, the same way that we talk to sales teams about their targets and quarterly performance, you know, it comes from leadership as well. Is this issue on the agenda? Does it come up in board meetings? Is it in the leadership team thing? Are people responsible for it? And how are we tracking and knowing our progress? And if you build the culture where this is important and people are measuring and tracking these things and looking at the data consistently, then that will become part of how you drive everybody to measures and metrics that matter ultimately. And, you know, it's key in order to think about doing that. I suppose, you know, to the broader question in terms of, you know, smaller organizations and how they balance what they do or you know, externally and internally, you know, it's both sides of the coin. You know, I've worked across a number of organizations for years that have said, oh, we're doing stuff internally, you know, we really want to focus there. And of course, you know, as Yinka said, you need to look after your Black employees. Like, you can't kind of just say, oh, welcome into the building if people are leaving at the same rate and telling all their friends don't join because they're leaving. Like, you've got to be able to do that, but it's not enough just to be saying, well, we're focusing focusing on all the internal stuff, because, you know, lo and behold, if you actually want to make a meaningful difference, you've got to invite people into the party as well. People have got to be, you know, moving into the organization, you know, to meaningfully move the dial in terms of representation and opportunity to bring in new skill sets, new talents, and ultimately to diversify the organization. And that is very much an external thing. You know, if we think about it, if this was a group of consumers that weren't buying a particular product, we'd think, okay, well, let's come up with a strategy to try and attract them and try and get them to use our product, etc. So why on earth is this not thought about from a talent branding point of view? And the same thing, if the Black community is systematically not engaging with your brand, does not want to work there, does not say good things, does not resonate, you know, do organizations know why? Do organizations know what they're thinking? Do organizations have any dialogue or community or connection with them? And how on earth is that going to be tackled? And again, these things need to come from a strategy, they need to come from leadership, and it's because ultimately performance on these things should be measured.
So I wanted to actually pick up on something you said in the first half of your answer there. And earlier on, you mentioned about how kind of 50 employees is a real tipping point, that if you haven't sort of baked it into your culture before then, it can become much harder to change something that's already established than it is to do it from the start. But again, just for being really kind of practical for people watching today, say you've got an organization of 30 people, what should you be measuring?
Well, measure all the things that you would measure as a big organization. How many women, for example, do you have on your board of advisors, so to speak, if you're not on a, you know, public company, but you will have advisors, you will have investors, etc. In your leadership team, what does the metrics look like? Do you have people from ethnic minority backgrounds? Do you have Black representatives in management? You know, measure these things effectively. And the reason why I say that 50 is because, you know, around that time that you start to get your first HR employee, that's almost to an extent where you start to delegate some of the responsibilities and duties around internal culture and internal development. And what you give them is fundamental to how that they will then be able to progress in the role. And by the time you get up to 50 people, you need HR effectively in an organization. So if we roll back, it's like, well, what are we handing off? What are we doing? Do we have a culture where all of the time that we're recruiting, we are not accepting all white male shortlists for all of our roles? Full stop. We don't work with organizations that provide that. That's the thing that we do from the very beginning, and we're not going to change that. And if that makes our lives difficult, we need to work harder as a response. Like, it's setting those sorts of parameters and those sorts of things which mean that you will start to build a culture which is accepting of that. So those are the sorts of things that people do. It's, you know, it can be pledges. It's like, well, oh, you know, I hear a lot of organizations saying, oh, well, you know, people don't find us, we don't know. Well, what are you doing to get out to those communities? What groups are you talking to? Who are you working with? What new spaces are you going to which you wouldn't usually go to try and attract talent?
Fantastic. And I wanted to come to Yinka, because I think that made me think directly of your earlier point about establishing why you're doing this. So we've talked about some really practical things that you can measure, which can help identify some of the actions you should be taking. But then if we're also looking at, you know, why are you doing this in the first place? What else should we be building on there, Yinka?
I think it's really important, and Ashleigh makes the point about there's a lot of conversation about, oh, you know, we can't find, you know, there is this constant conversation about the Black talent pipeline, which I'm sure the rest of the panelists may well agree, but it makes me want to just shake somebody, because there isn't an issue with the Black talent pipeline at all. But the question is, where are you going to look? You know, if you don't go to the sea to look for, you know, tree-based creatures. There is this conversation about constantly looking for love in all the wrong places. The fact is that if you are not visible to a community, if they don't know you, if they don't trust you, if the people who are in there are whispering to them, do not come here for love nor money, then ultimately there are many, you know, it doesn't matter what your external communications are saying, when ultimately, you know, the way that we are built as social beings, we trust the advice and information of the people we trust. And so there is a massive piece of work long before you ever want to employ people from any specific community. It's really important to understand whether that community is engaging with you in general, whether they know about you, whether they'll trust you. we keep coming back to this issue of safety. If you are not known to be a safe place to a specific community, the rest of your metrics are going to fall down, because that is the initial metric for people to understand whether they should come anywhere near you at all. And so it is and in our tool, in our playbook, we long before we spoke, we almost added an extra piece to our puzzle. And broke down the journey into 5 key steps. But before you go through the idea of wanting to kind of look for that initial person or that, or an additional person, you really need to understand how you are perceived, because that perception is absolutely their reality. And that is going to make or break your chances to get the people in through the door, to have those thriving careers, to create those incredible resource groups, to promote people, to get people on the board. All of those things are ultimately going to be dependent on those very initial metrics. So I absolutely agree with Ashleigh, they need to be measured, but it's the things that happen long before they get to your front door that you need to be aware of.
There's two really interesting things that you talked about there that I wanted to pick up on with Gori and then with Tracey. They're kind of sort of separate points. And the first one really is, so if what you're aiming for is to have an environment where people feel safe, they feel included, they feel able to succeed, how do you know whether you're getting that right? Like how do you measure that? Gori, can I ask you for your point of view on that?
Sure. Well, the data piece is not an easy piece for smaller organizations. Getting the measurement right on the diversity across your organization is a bit easier to do for smaller organizations, perhaps, than it is for larger organizations. But trying to measure things like inclusion and belonging and how people feel like they are engaged in the organization and what the perception is like for the organization is really something that is challenging, but not impossible, right? So even running internal audits, and we've done that with a few companies about what their perception is of the organization, how they're engaging around diversity inclusion, are they, what's their sort of thoughts around belonging. It's really important to even run those company surveys, especially if you're a small organization, because you have a very easy reach and hopefully you can get a lot of buy-in for that too. And then once you have that information, for me, and a piece of the toolkit or the hackathon that we focused on was the education piece, right? So, once you've got the data of what people perceive the organization to be like and what they invest in, how are you ensuring that you're proactively investing in those areas, right? So, for example, being deliberate about who you are supporting education-wise. So, for example, if it's leadership, are you supporting leadership with the right tools and techniques to be able to have more confident, courageous conversations around not just race, but their inclusive communication, their inclusive leadership, how are you ensuring they have the tools to manage diverse teams? It's really important. And then on the equity piece, right, where we look at that challenge around belonging, how are you supporting those particular individuals, Black individuals in the organization, as they try to progress through the organization with the tools to be able to progress, right? So there's a lot of support around, career progression, navigating organizations, managing microaggressions, managing upwards, right? We know there are always challenges for some individuals or Black individuals in organizations around performance reviews and appraisals. And that's not just going to come from them. The onus isn't on that Black individual to be able to have a better performance review. It's on the manager to be able to ask the right questions and not feel like they're going to, be hiring or progressing somebody that they feel more sort of culturally connected to. So, really think about how do you measure that inclusion? How do you are you asking your managers if they are feeling like the tools and techniques that they're given allow them to be able to deliver on the culture that you're setting out to build? So that's really, really important. I think the education piece is absolutely key, and we have a lot of that in the toolkit. A few examples of how you can do that.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm going to come to Tracey for the second thing that I wanted to build on. From the earlier point, but just a quick reminder to everybody watching to kind of get your questions into the Q&A below, because we're going to be coming to some of those questions in just a moment. But Tracey, there was something else that was said around, where should you look? Where should you look for great talent? And I know that you have a really strong point of view on that, so I wanted to bring you in here.
Yes, I think I definitely encourage everyone to look at the playbook around develop, promote and retain Black employees, because where we looked at developing that was around coming up with really practical actions and a framework of any organisation can pick up and put into place and implement immediately. I think what's key to mention here is once you've got them into the organisation, as Yinka's mentioned, it is about keeping them there and retaining them there, because we have so many examples of so many organisations where they have really good measurement metrics on diversity when they're coming in at the lower levels, graduates or are coming in just at a junior level. But then as they go up the organisation, you see that those metrics just fall away. They're just not equal, and it doesn't even demonstrate that and reflect their customer base or even their population. And so what's really important is that you look at different things that you can put in place. So that's mentoring, open and honest discussions, like to what Gori was saying. It's around the people helping from coaching and mentoring top down and sponsorship, that you're openly advertising promotion opportunities and that there is a fair and transparent promotion process. And with that, the pay that comes with it, so there's equal pay, and that people are able to be helping each other, whether it's buddy systems or mentoring or peer mentoring, to be able to help them progress and work to their full potential. And that's what's really key, I think, in terms of retaining employees. And that then helps build trust. So as Yinka mentioned, it is about making sure from the outside in that the talent is looking at that organisation and saying, I trust that organisation, I know that I can thrive there, so I'll come in and I will be able to grow my career there.
Fantastic, thank you. Some brilliant points there, and I want to come on to some of the audience questions in a minute. But just to kind of to recap, I think some of the things we've heard from all of you so far today. Really, it's about baking inclusion and diversity into your strategy from day one, but know why you're doing it, know what it is you're hoping to achieve, and then working out what you want to measure as a result of that. Focusing on your culture, your allyship, leadership from the top to build that culture and support across the organisation. Then think about your recruitment, your external message. What's the message that you're putting out there into the world, and how are you going to find great talent? But then, as Tracey was just saying, make sure that you're also considering your team within the organisation already. How are you retaining them? How are you supporting them? How are you helping them develop? And then really kind of checking your data, measuring your progress. And I think something that's come across really strongly from everybody as we've talked through this is being fair, being honest, and being ready to admit your mistakes as you go. Before we go on to some of our kind of questions from the audience, have I missed anything in that kind of sum up of the key advice that you guys would give?
I wouldn't say you missed anything, but what I would also add is the fact that to just remind and to really encourage anyone who is looking at this kind of journey, just to say that the challenges or the things that you're working against in order to create a more diverse and more equitable organisation, they're structural. So this may well be hard. And I want to really encourage organisations not to be dissuaded by the fact that it may be difficult. The fact is that ultimately, it is difficult because of everything that's gone before, but the opportunity that we are given at this time to change the trajectory of the conversations of the future is so powerful and not to be missed. When we were focusing and really working on our portion of the playbook in terms of recruitment, we talked about, we basically discussed the fact that the recruitment, the notion and the way that people are recruited in now is essentially broken. Because the metric or the success metric is getting someone through the door. But getting someone through the door is literally the start of the conversation, not the end of one. And so we began to really think about, and it was, through our ongoing conversations, the importance of all the other things of ensuring that person is able to thrive. They're able to develop their careers. They're able to, create a sense of agency and thriving in that environment. And we talked about the fact that, well, in a blue sky situation, if we were able to do that, and completely rip up the book and start anew, we would look at a completely different set of metrics. But in the absence of that, what we kept reminding ourselves is that there are absolutely quick wins, but there may not always be quick fixes. And so to absolutely be encouraged by, go and get those quick wins, have those initial conversations, really, lead with openness and honesty, hold your hands up quickly if you make mistakes, but also remember that it is going to be a challenge because of everything that's gone before. This is years and years and years of things going in the wrong direction. Turning a ship that big and that entrenched is really challenging. So don't be discouraged because it's hard, but because ultimately, you can do hard things.
Thank you. And I think Gori had a quick point to add just before we go to some questions from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really quickly on the individuals that either D&I team or your HR team that is actually looking at rolling out these programs. Those individuals themselves are continually trying to, I guess, upskill themselves in this space, right? To feel more comfortable with how they have the conversations and deploy the right level of training. On the education piece, I always say, when you're thinking about your managers, your people managers, people in your organization that are involved in hiring or progression, have a consideration for the fact that they may never have had any form of educational support around inclusion or belonging. If that's never happened, invest in them, because when they leave work, they may not get much of that outside of work. So think about how you help them manage diversity, and think about how you help them make better decisions when they are trying to promote their individuals or have better performance sort of appraisals, for example. So I would say just have a think to, how do I invest? Perhaps you have to go externally for this. Perhaps you have to look internally at programs you can sort of tap into, online learning, whatever it might be, to help them learn how they can be better sort of carriers of that culture that you're trying to get across the organization. So just sort of back to the education piece. And there's lots of resources available and lots of organizations available within the toolkit as well to help you on that journey.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now we're going to take we've got some questions in from the audience, and Yinka, I'm going to come back to you because there's been a number of questions around recruitment specifically. There are two questions that I'm going to throw at you at the same time because you may have an answer that kind of encompasses both of them. The first one is, what is your response to there just isn't enough diverse talent out there? And the second question, which is related, is where is the best places to go to engage with and attract talent from underrepresented groups? So can I come back to you, Yinka, for a point of view on either or both of those questions?
Absolutely. With respect to there not being enough diverse talent out there, no, is the short answer to that. But what I will say is when we began to think about recruitment, we talked about the fact that it's really important that you recruit for success in the job, and the skills, there may be a very heavy emphasis, for example, on qualifications in roles and jobs that may be very skills based. And so in terms of thinking about one of the things and what one of the areas that we began to support and really think about how to support organizations is to really reverse engineer and really think about the job description itself. So if you look at the people, for example, who are at the top of some of the biggest organizations in the world, some of the skills that they have and potentially would have demonstrated, at the very start of their careers would either have been, A, very different to what they developed along the way, or B, can you imagine hiring a young, Steve Jobs? He'd have been a bloody nightmare to manage. He and yet became founded Apple, all of his work at Pixar. So one of the things that we really need to think about is what we're looking for when we're hiring and how we're hiring. The second area in terms of where to look, there's a lot of safety and security in going to known quantities, like your Oxbridge, like your, universities, in order to go and find, talent for your organizations. But the fact is that if we're fully aware that Oxbridge is underrepresented with Black and ethnic minority students, then you're already going to a pool that is shallow, and then so your chances of finding the talent you're looking for is even more shallow. So it's really about understanding the skills that are needed. This is absolutely not a conversation about lowering the standards. It is not a conversation about making it easier or dumbing down your process, but it's about really understanding what it is you're looking for, hiring for potential, not just for qualifications, and really thinking about what will be best for your organizations, not just in the person coming in as an entry-level candidate, but also the kinds of things that will make someone successful in your organization on an ongoing basis, because some of the skills and requirements of that journey may well be quite different to what you're asking for initially.
Absolutely.
Can I just add to that as well?
Of course.
I think it's also important not to, necessarily go to your traditional routes of recruitment agencies, but also to look at training providers who are specifically training people that are of Black origin or of very inclusivity. So you'll have training providers such as Black Coder, and you'll have School of Code and Tech Talent Academy. Those are some of the organizations and training providers that are training technology, training digital skills and tech skills that for tech organizations that I think have a really inclusive approach and sometimes very specific approach to training just black people. So I think, always look at, it's all very well looking again for your wide recruitment, but also look at specific training providers that have that talent pool there.
There was another question that came in that I think is very closely related to that. The question was 51% of recent job applicants were ethnic minority, but few had the right experience. We're considering a junior role to create opportunity, but is there another way? It sounded like, from what you were saying, that one great way around that could be through training.
Yeah, most definitely through training providers that are offering those skills to offer to people who want to get into the tech industry. And I think there is a wide range of training providers now and government initiatives as well also that are being supported to help close that skills gap. And I really do think that because there is these more exclusive sort of groups as well that are providing specific training for Black employees, they want these sorts of training providers. I've worked with them personally. They want to collaborate and reach out to organizations. They want to share their talent pool with you. So I think reaching out to those training providers will having a really good understanding of where their talent's coming from. And these are qualified, trained individuals who have that are looking for those experiences and looking for that development as well in an organization as their next level or next port would be really useful. So most definitely reach out to them.
Fantastic. And just a reminder to anybody who might want to dig into that and get more information, on the Tech Talent Charter website, we have a directory of organisations who can help with a lot of this, as well as the playbook with some of this advice as well. So I wanted to, we've been talking about recruitment, and then we've also had some questions in around retention. And one question, building on what you were saying earlier, Tracey. Tracey mentioned allowing people to grow to their full potential. Can the panel unpack that? We see diverse talent coming in, but the retention rate is low.
Yes, so this is about holding up a mirror to yourself and the organisation and being honest and open about that. If you're willing to have conversations with individuals of ethnic diverse backgrounds that are not career limiting and a really true safe place, they will tell you what they want to be able to have open up in terms of their development and their promotion prospects. And it is about helping them, as you do with everyone in the organisation, around skills, capability, education, and showing the opportunity in terms of an open and transparent promotion process. So it's always about, people don't always know when there is promotion opportunity available. Where do you advertise those? Who is it accessible to? Who are you actually helping coach and mentor to get them to be able to be appropriate for those skill sets? And it's also using transferable skills, showing people the way how they can move, not just sideways, but upwards, using those transferable skills. And that links to the point that Marika made earlier. It's not just about bringing in tech developers and coders into the tech sector. It's also about bringing people from other sectors into the tech organizations that have transferable skills. And that's another pool of places to look at. But when you're talking about reaching full potential, that's about making sure you get rid of the glass ceiling and allow people to really work to their full, to their strengths, show them where their strengths allow them to be able to have great opportunities for career growth, and then help them get there. Like you help everyone in the organisation. That is about training, and it is about also peer-to-peer mentoring as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tracey. And the time has absolutely flown. We've only got a few minutes left. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to give our panel a chance to share any last bits of advice or key points that maybe we haven't covered today and they think are important for everyone to take away. The floor's open to anyone.
I wanted to jump in just to wrap up on Tracey's point. Be deliberate about who you're investing in. So if you're investing in your Black talent, your Black colleagues, perhaps you're doing it through an ERG, an employee resource group, provide them the tools, the skill sets, that equity piece, give them training on how they can progress. Break that glass ceiling for them. Really important that you can invest there. If you're investing in leadership, make sure they are confident with the tools to be able to have better performance reviews, better approaches to hiring, so that when you do get a great pool of candidates, that they can give them an opportunity to be able to progress into the organization, be onboarded well, and hopefully, tackle that lack of representation at the high levels too.
Brilliant.
And also to publicise your diversity and inclusion, and have that and publicise it in a way through storytelling, and celebrate the successes and the steps that you're taking towards a more inclusive organisation, because these stories is things that we want to hear, we want to see more of, and it really does help people give a really informed decision of who they'd like to work for. But that open transparency in terms of the actionable actions that you're taking is really beneficial.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
My one final thing I'll say.
Yeah, make it quick.
The toolkit is there. There are organisations like ourselves and others that are out here actively working on this. Like, where to look and you'll find them. There are people who are there to help and are trying to solve some of these challenges that organisations are facing. Do engage.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your fantastic, brilliant points today. We've taken some really great notes. A reminder to everybody to have a look at the Tech Talent Charter website, which will point you towards some of the organisations that our panels have been talking about today. But to wrap it up, I'm going to thank them all again and hand back to Debbie.
We're going to pretend I said something really clever a minute ago instead of having my mic off. So thank you, Rebecca, for landing that so perfectly and to time. Let me say to the audience, thank you for some super questions. A few things that I wanted to just touch on. A few of you were asking questions, rightly so, about other lenses of diversity, whether that be other lenses within ethnic minorities, whether that's things like neurodiversity. We do intend, these hackathons are an ongoing piece. This is not a one-off and our open playbook is done. And in fact, if you look ahead in 2021, we want to look at things like Islamophobia. We want to look at things like neurodiversity to keep moving the dial forward. As Rebecca said, as Ashleigh said, look at our directory. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are some great individuals and organizations that can start working with you today. And then if you're also really intrigued by those wonderful ideas around retraining, training programs, alternate routes into tech, then tomorrow is the day for you, because all day we are going to be looking at companies who have set up programs that provide those alternate routes into tech. We will at lunch hear from women who've been through those programs. And listen, again, if you're an SME or a startup, really valuable, because they're going to be offering some advice to employers. And I got a sneak peek at that. And it is perfect for small employers. These are things that big companies can do, but you as a small company can get in there, hustle, and find some great talent. And then in the evening, for our evening cuppa, as well as summing up the week, we'll be bringing together to look at what can you be doing to help what's happening in schools, what's happening in universities, what can we do in terms of skilling up the existing workforce to help them get into tech. So much to do, but it's important that we all start today. We have been on this tough conversation. This is day 2. We've just passed the halfway point. Please see below where you are adding those awesome questions. There's going to be a link to asking you to survey, to tell us, how did the session go on? What do we need more of, less of? We really want that feedback. Thank you if you can do it. If you haven't already, have a look at the playbook. Like I said, those experts put together some of our best guides we've had created yet. Thank you for coming today. Thank you to my amazing panel. Thank you for Rebecca of making sure we could land it all in time and release people back into their workaday world. I really hope that I can see you tonight for our evening cuppa. We'll be looking at social inclusion. That's going to have a lot of intersectionality with what we've talked about today. But it's something not a lot of people have had a chance to really think about how we move the dial in that respect. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, do still sign up below. We can see you. Other than that, let us know. Keep the conversation going. Drop something to us on social. And if you haven't joined the Tech Talent Charter, why not? Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks to my panel. Goodbye.